The Rosetta Stone, Unlocking the Secrets of Ancient Egypt, a deep sleep journey into one of history's greatest linguistic discoveries. Welcome to the Deep Sleep channel. Tonight we are exploring one of the most fascinating stories in the history of human discovery. A story about a mysterious ancient stone. A story about an unbreakable code that puzzled scholars for centuries. A story about the brilliant minds who finally decoded it. A story about unlocking the secrets of one of the world's greatest civilizations. This is the story of the Rosetta Stone, a black granite slab inscribed with text in 3 different scripts. For nearly 2,000 years, the hieroglyphic script on this stone was completely unreadable. No one knew what it meant. Scholars could see the symbols, but the meaning was lost to history. Then, in 1822, a French scholar named Jean-François Champollion made a breakthrough. He cracked the code. He figured out how to read the hieroglyphic script. In doing so, he opened the door to an entire lost civilization. He allowed the ancient Egyptians to speak to us across the centuries. The discovery of how to read hieroglyphics was not the result of a single brilliant insight. It was the result of decades of work. It was the result of multiple scholars contributing pieces to the puzzle. It was the result of careful observation, logical reasoning, and brilliant intuition. It is a story of human perseverance and the power of the human mind. Close your eyes. Let yourself travel back in time. Let yourself meet the scholars who struggled to decode the Rosetta Stone. Let yourself witness the moment when the code was cracked. Let yourself understand the joy of discovering ancient secrets. Let yourself drift into sleep, contemplating the mysteries of the past and the power of knowledge. This is a meditation on language, on history, on discovery, and on the connections that link us to our planet. The background. Egypt and its ancient language. To understand the significance of the Rosetta Stone, we must first understand the history of Egypt and its ancient writing system. Ancient Egypt was one of the world's greatest civilizations. It flourished along the Nile River for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians built enormous monuments like the pyramids and the Sphinx. They developed sophisticated systems of government and administration. They created beautiful art and literature. They made significant advances in mathematics, astronomy, and medicine. The ancient Egyptians used a unique writing system called hieroglyphics. The word hieroglyphic comes from Greek words meaning sacred carvings. Hieroglyphics were used to write the Egyptian language. The system consisted of hundreds of different symbols, each representing either a sound, a word, or a concept. Hieroglyphics were used primarily for formal and religious texts. They were inscribed on temple walls, on monuments, and on objects meant to last forever. Hieroglyphics represented the most formal and elevated form of the Egyptian language. For everyday writing, the ancient Egyptians developed a simpler, faster script called hieratic. Hieratic was written with a brush and ink, rather than carved into stone. It was used for administrative documents, letters, and everyday writing. Hieratic was like the cursive handwriting of ancient Egypt. Later, the Egyptians developed an even simpler script called Coptic, which used Greek letters. As Greek and Roman influence grew in Egypt, Coptic became more common. Eventually, Greek and Roman culture dominated Egypt, and the ancient hieroglyphic script fell out of use. By the time of the Roman conquest of Egypt, hieroglyphics were no longer being written. The knowledge of how to read them was lost. The Egyptian priests who had guarded the knowledge for centuries eventually died without passing on their knowledge. The code was broken, and no one knew how to fix it. For over 1,000 years, hieroglyphics remained unreadable. The monuments stood, their inscriptions mysterious and incomprehensible. Scholars wondered what they said, but no one could read them. Napoleon and the Rosetta Stone. In 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Egypt. Napoleon was interested in Egypt for several reasons. Egypt was wealthy and could provide resources for France. Egypt had also always fascinated Europeans as a source of ancient civilization and mystery. With his military forces, Napoleon also brought scholars. He brought archaeologists, historians, linguists, and other specialists. He wanted to study Egypt and understand its ancient past. He wanted to gather information about the land, the people, and the antiquities. 1799, during the Napoleonic occupation of Egypt, French soldiers were working in the area near the town of Rosetta, in the Nile Delta. They were fortifying the town and working on various construction projects. During this work, they discovered a stone slab, broken into pieces but largely intact. The stone was made of black granite, a hard stone often used for important monuments. The stone was about 3 feet tall and about 2 feet wide. On one side, the stone was inscribed with text in 3 different scripts. The inscriptions consisted of 3 sections. The top section was written in hieroglyphic script. The middle section was written in hieratic script. The bottom section was written in Greek script. The French soldiers recognized the Greek section. Greek was a known language. Greek could be read and understood. But why would the same text be written 3 times in 3 different scripts? What was the purpose of this stone? The stone was moved to Cairo, where Napoleon's scholars could examine it. They immediately realized the significance of the discovery. Here was a text written in 3 languages, including hieroglyphics. If they could understand what the Greek section said, they might be able to compare it with the hieroglyphic section. They might be able to use the Greek as a key to unlock the hieroglyphics. The Greek translation and the first insights. The Greek section of the Rosetta Stone was written in clear, readable Greek. The scholars translated it without difficulty. The text was a decree issued by the Egyptian priests in 196 BC, during the reign of Ptolemy V, a Greek-Egyptian pharaoh. The decree was an official proclamation honoring the king. It described the king's good deeds and stated that the priests would honor him. It ended with a statement that the decree should be inscribed on a stone in 3 scripts: hieroglyphic, hieratic, and Greek. So now the scholars knew what the stone was meant to convey. It was an official proclamation. The same text was written in 3 scripts so that it could be read by different groups of people. Hieroglyphics for the priests and the educated elite, hieratic for everyday use, Greek for the Greek-speaking population and for official records. With this information, the scholars now had a tool for decoding the hieroglyphics. The Greek text was the key, but how could they use it? The challenge was that hieroglyphics were not a simple alphabet. They were not just a different way of writing the same letters. Hieroglyphics used pictures and symbols to represent sounds, words, and concepts. Some symbols represented single sounds, like letters in an alphabet, but many symbols represented entire words or concepts. For example, the symbol of a bee represented the word bee, but it also represented the concept of kingship, because the king was sometimes called the bee. A picture of a sun represented the word sun, but also the sun god Ra. Decoding hieroglyphics required understanding not just sounds, but also concepts and meanings. The scholars of the time tried to decode the Rosetta Stone by comparing the Greek text with the hieroglyphic text, looking for patterns and correspondences. But the task proved extremely difficult. The problem of assumption. One major obstacle to decoding the Rosetta Stone was an incorrect assumption that most scholars made. The scholars assumed that hieroglyphics were purely symbolic. They assumed that each hieroglyphic symbol represented an idea or concept, not a sound. This assumption was based on the ideas of a Roman scholar named Apollo, who had written a book about hieroglyphics in the 4th century AD. Apollo believed that hieroglyphics were a purely symbolic system, where each symbol represented a concept or idea. This idea had dominated European thinking about hieroglyphics for over 1,000 years. If hieroglyphics were purely symbolic, then the task of decoding them became much more difficult. It would be almost impossible to figure out the meaning of a symbol just by comparing it to a Greek text. The symbols would have to be understood through their cultural and religious significance. But this assumption was wrong. Hieroglyphics were not purely symbolic. They were a mixed system. Some symbols did represent sounds, and many of them represented sounds that corresponded to letters in an alphabet. But the scholars didn't realize this. Early attempts at decoding. In the decades after the Rosetta Stone was discovered, many scholars attempted to decode it. The stone was displayed in the British Museum in London after the British defeated the French and seized control of Egypt. Scholars from across Europe studied copies of the stone and attempted to crack the code. One of the first scholars to make significant progress was an English scientist named Thomas Young. Young was a brilliant polymath. He was a physicist, a physician, a linguist, and a scholar of ancient languages. He had already made important contributions to physics and optics. Young studied the Rosetta Stone was brought to France after Napoleon's invasion. Champollion studied it intensively. He was determined to crack the code. He spent years studying copies of the stone, comparing the three scripts, looking for patterns and correspondences. Champollion had a significant advantage over other scholars. He was fluent in Coptic, a language that was descended from ancient Egyptian. Coptic was the language of the Coptic Christian Church in Egypt. Most European scholars did not know Coptic, but Champollion had learned it. This knowledge of Coptic proved crucial. Champollion realized that Coptic words might correspond with ancient Egyptian words. If he could identify Coptic words that appeared in the hieroglyphic text, he might be able to use Coptic as a bridge to understand the ancient Egyptian language. Champollion also made a crucial realization about the nature of the hieroglyphic script. He recognized that hieroglyphics were a mixed system. Some symbols represented sounds, some represented entire words, some represented concepts. The system was more complex than anyone had previously realized. Champollion focused on the royal names in the cartouches. He knew that Egyptian royal names were typically written with the king's name, followed by a title or epithet. He knew the names of several Egyptian pharaohs from Greek texts. If he could identify these names in the hieroglyphic text, he could begin to figure out the phonetic values of the symbols. He identified the name Ptolemy in the cartouches. Ptolemy was the name of the king in the Rosetta Stone decree. If he could match the symbols in the cartouche spelling Ptolemy with the letters of the name Ptolemy, he could figure out the phonetic values of each symbol. The breakthrough moment. On September 27, 1822, Champollion made his breakthrough. He had been comparing the cartouches in the Rosetta Stone with other Egyptian inscriptions. He had been working on identifying the phonetic values of different symbols. Suddenly, he realized that the symbols in the cartouches did indeed correspond to the sounds of the royal names. The symbol that looked like a lion represented the sound of the letter L. The symbol that looked like a reed represented the sound of a vowel. The symbol that looked like a throne represented another sound. More importantly, Champollion realized that this pattern could be extended beyond royal names. If the symbols represented sounds in royal names, they likely represented sounds in all Egyptian words. The entire hieroglyphic system was phonetic, at least in large part. Champollion realized that many of the symbols that represented sounds were actually simplified pictures of objects that made those sounds. The symbol for the sound R was a picture of a mouth, because the word for mouth in Egyptian was R. The symbol for a vowel was a picture of a reed, because the word for reed contained that vowel sound. It was a system of phonetic symbols based on the principles of rebus writing, where a picture of an object is used to represent the sound of that object's name. With this realization, the whole system suddenly became clear to Champollion. He could now read the hieroglyphics. He could understand the symbols. He could translate the text. Champollion was so excited by his discovery that he rushed to the Institute of France and announced his breakthrough to the assembled scholars. According to legend, when he presented his findings to the Academy of Sciences, he was so overcome with emotion that he collapsed. The code had been cracked. The complete system revealed. Once Champollion had cracked the basic code, he continued to study the Rosetta Stone and other Egyptian inscriptions to fully understand the hieroglyphic system. He realized that the system was more complex than he had initially thought. Hieroglyphics used several different types of symbols. Phonetic symbols represented individual sounds or combinations of sounds. Ideograms represented entire words or concepts. Determinatives were symbols placed after words to indicate what category the word belonged to. For example, the determinative for man would be placed after words referring to male humans. The system was elegant and sophisticated. It allowed for precise communication while also maintaining the beautiful visual quality that made hieroglyphics so distinctive and aesthetically pleasing. Champollion continued to study Egyptian inscriptions for the rest of his life. He published his findings. He created a comprehensive system for reading and writing hieroglyphics. He founded the field of Egyptology, the study of ancient Egypt. His contributions to the understanding of ancient Egypt were enormous. By cracking the code of hieroglyphics, he opened a window into an ancient civilization. He allowed the ancient Egyptians to speak to us across the centuries. He allowed their language, their thoughts, their culture to be understood. The impact. opening the door to ancient Egypt. The decoding of the hieroglyphics had immediate and profound impacts. Scholars could now read the inscriptions on temples and monuments throughout Egypt. They could understand the religious texts and ceremonies of ancient Egypt. They could learn about the history and culture of this great civilization. The inscriptions revealed a complex and sophisticated society. They revealed the lives of the pharaohs and the nobility. They revealed the religious beliefs of the ancient Egyptians. They revealed the daily lives of ordinary people. They revealed the achievements of Egyptian engineers, architects, artists, and scholars. Scholars learned about Egyptian history and chronology. They learned about the different periods of Egyptian civilization. They learned about the dynasties of pharaohs and their achievements. They learned about the relationships between Egypt and neighboring civilizations. The hieroglyphic texts revealed the richness of Egyptian literature. There were religious texts and hymns. There were love poems and wisdom literature. There were administrative documents and legal codes. There were magical texts and scientific knowledge. The decoding of the Rosetta Stone also had practical impacts. It changed the way Egypt was viewed in Europe. Rather than being seen as an exotic and mysterious land, Egypt became understood as the site of one of the world's great civilizations. This understanding influenced European art, architecture, and culture. Egyptian motifs appeared in European design. Egyptian themes appeared in European literature and art. The Rosetta Stone itself, a remarkable object. Now let's take a closer look at the Rosetta Stone itself. Understanding the physical object helps us appreciate its historical significance. The stone is made of black granite. Granite is a very hard stone formed from igneous rock deep in the earth. It was quarried in Egypt and was chosen for important monuments because of its durability and beauty. The stone would need to last for thousands of years, and granite was ideal for this purpose. The stone is about 3 feet tall, 2 feet wide, and about 11 inches thick. It is broken into pieces, but the pieces still fit together, and most of the original text is intact. The edges of the stone are slightly damaged and worn, but the inscriptions are still clearly visible. The text is organized into 3 sections. The top section is the hieroglyphic text, the middle section is the hieratic text, the bottom section is the Greek text. The hieroglyphic text consists of 14 lines of hieroglyphic symbols. The symbols are carefully carved into the stone with precise spacing and alignment. The skill of the Egyptian stonecutter is evident in the quality of the work. The hieratic text is below the hieroglyphic text. Hieratic is a cursive script, and it is written more rapidly and less formally than the hieroglyphic text. The hieratic version of the same text is much more compact than the hieroglyphic version. The Greek text is at the bottom of the stone. The Greek text is the most complete section, with 54 lines of carefully carved Greek letters. The Greek text is written in a formal, classical style. The Rosetta Stone is remarkable not just for the information it contains, but for its physical properties. It is a physical link to the ancient world. It is an object that was created over 2,000 years ago and has survived to our own time. Holding a copy of the Rosetta Stone, or even looking at photographs of it, gives us a sense of connection to the ancient Egyptians who created it. The linguistic significance more than just hieroglyphics. While the Rosetta Stone is most famous for containing hieroglyphic text, its significance extends beyond just cracking the code of hieroglyphics. The stone also contained hieratic and Greek text, and understanding the relationships between these 3 scripts revealed important information about the Egyptian language and writing systems. The discovery of the Rosetta Stone and its successful decoding helped establish the principles of comparative linguistics. By comparing 3 different versions of the same text in 3 different languages and scripts, scholars could understand how different writing systems worked. They could understand the relationship between spoken language and written symbols. The successful decoding of the Rosetta Stone also demonstrated the power of logical reasoning and scientific method in solving historical puzzles. Champollion and other scholars did not guess or speculate wildly. They made careful observations. They tested hypotheses. They looked for patterns and evidence. This methodical approach led to success. The Rosetta Stone also revealed information about the Egyptian language itself. By reading hieroglyphic texts, scholars learned about the grammar, vocabulary, and structure of ancient Egyptian. They learned how the language changed over time. They learned how Egyptian influenced other languages in the Mediterranean region. The story of the stone, from ancient times to today. The story of the Rosetta Stone extends beyond its creation and decoding. The stone itself has an interesting history. The stone was created in 196 BC, during the reign of Ptolemy V. It was likely placed in a temple in Rosetta, where it would serve as a public proclamation of the pharaoh's decrees. The stone would have been visible to priests and educated people who could read the hieroglyphic and hieratic scripts, as well as to Greek-speaking people who could read the Greek text. For several centuries after it was created, the stone would have been read and understood by the Egyptian priests who maintained the temples. But as Egyptian civilization declined and Greek and Roman culture became dominant, fewer people could read hieroglyphics. Eventually, the knowledge of how to read the ancient script was lost. The stone likely remained in the temple for centuries, becoming covered with sand and debris. It became buried and forgotten, a relic of a lost civilization whose language no one could read. 1799, over 1,000 years later, the stone was rediscovered by French soldiers during Napoleon's campaign. The stone was moved to Cairo, where it became an object of great interest to scholars. When the British defeated the French and took control of Egypt, the stone was moved to the British Museum in London, where it has remained ever since. The stone is now one of the most famous objects in the world. Thousands of people visit it every year. It is displayed behind protective glass, where visitors can see the ancient inscriptions. Copies of the Rosetta Stone have been made and distributed to museums and institutions around the world. The stone has become a symbol of linguistic discovery and the power of human knowledge. The legacy of the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone has had an enormous legacy. It has influenced the way we understand the past. It has shown us the importance of finding connections between different sources of information. It has demonstrated the power of logical reasoning and scientific method. The successful decoding of the Rosetta Stone led to the development of Egyptology as a field of academic study. Scholars could now study ancient Egypt in depth. They could understand the language, the culture, the history, and the achievements of this great civilization. The Rosetta Stone has also become a symbol of human achievement and the power of knowledge. It represents the triumph of human intellect over mystery. It shows how dedicated and brilliant people can solve seemingly impossible problems. The stone has also become a symbol of cultural exchange and translation. The fact that the same message was written in 3 different scripts shows the importance of communication across different groups and languages. It shows how important it is to be able to communicate across cultural and linguistic boundaries. In our modern world, the Rosetta Stone remains relevant. We live in a time of unprecedented diversity and globalization. People from different cultures and languages must communicate with each other. The Rosetta Stone reminds us of the power of language and communication. It reminds us that even when language barriers seem insurmountable, human ingenuity and effort can bridge the gap. The scholars, people behind the discovery. The successful decoding of the Rosetta Stone was the result of work by multiple brilliant scholars. While Jean-François Champollion is most famous for finally cracking the code, other scholars made important contributions. Thomas Young, the English scholar, made significant progress in understanding the system. He correctly identified several phonetic values and recognized the structure of the writing system. Although he didn't reach the final breakthrough himself, his work pointed the way for future scholars. Other scholars in France, Germany, Italy, and elsewhere studied the stone and contributed their own insights and observations. The process of decoding the Rosetta Stone was a collaborative effort, spread across decades and involving many brilliant minds. Champollion himself was a remarkable person. Born in 1790, he showed early promise as a brilliant scholar. He was fluent in many languages and was deeply interested in ancient civilizations. His knowledge of Coptic, which was crucial to his breakthrough, came from his own initiative and passion for learning. He studied the Rosetta Stone not because he was assigned to do so, but because he was fascinated by the puzzle. Champollion's breakthrough moment came on September 27, 1822, when he was 32 years old. After this breakthrough, he continued to work on understanding hieroglyphics until his death in 1832 at the age of 41. His career was relatively short, but his contributions were profound and lasting. The wonder of discovery, what the stone reveals. The Rosetta Stone itself contains the text of a decree issued by Egyptian priests honoring Pharaoh Ptolemy V. The text is not particularly exciting or dramatic. It is a formal, official proclamation. It honors the pharaoh and describes his good deeds. It states that the priests will honor him and his image will be kept in temples. But the significance of the stone does not lie in the specific content of the text. The significance lies in the fact that the text can be read and understood. The significance lies in the way that knowledge of the Greek text allowed scholars to decode the hieroglyphics. By decoding this one stone, scholars opened the door to understanding thousands of other inscriptions throughout Egypt. Temples that had been silent for centuries now spoke. Monuments that had been mysterious became comprehensible. A great civilization that had been lost to time became living and real. The Rosetta Stone shows us something profound about human connection across time. The ancient Egyptians who created this stone did not know that their language would become unreadable for 1,000 years. They did not know that it would take brilliant scholars 2,000 years later to decode it. But they created the stone with such care and precision that it has survived to our own time. And through that stone they speak to us. The broader story, language and understanding. The story of the Rosetta Stone is ultimately a story about language and understanding. Language is the primary tool that humans use to communicate with each other. Language allows us to share ideas, to preserve knowledge, to tell stories, and to connect with each other. But language is also a barrier. When we don't understand someone's language, we can't understand them. We can't access their knowledge, their thoughts, their feelings. A language that is lost is a kind of death. The knowledge contained in that language dies with it. The Rosetta Stone represents the triumph of the human desire to understand. Even though the Egyptian language had been lost for 1,000 years, scholars were determined to understand it. They spent decades studying the stone, they developed new theories and tested them. They worked together across countries and languages to solve the puzzle. And they succeeded. The breakthrough came not through luck or accident, but through careful observation, logical reasoning, and brilliant insight. The breakthrough showed what human intelligence can accomplish. The Rosetta Stone also shows us something about the power of writing. Writing allows us to preserve knowledge. A spoken word is lost as soon as it is spoken, but a written word can last for thousands of years. The ancient Egyptians wrote their thoughts on stone, and we chalpari, which are the reprinting which charable halodo. Lorna zerplodo, jarplobitzer. When we do, later we will cut up the card of Champollion from mom. Like must be John. As we drift deeper into sleep, contemplating the Rosetta Stone, we contemplate the connections that link us to the past and the future. The ancient Egyptians who created the Rosetta Stone did not know that their language would become unreadable. They did not know that it would take 2,000 years for their words to be understood again. But they created the stone anyway, with care and precision, hoping that their message would endure. And their hope was justified. Their message did endure. 2,000 years later, brilliant scholars figured out how to read their words. The ancient Egyptians got to speak to the future. In our own time, we create our own messages. We write books and articles. We create films and music. We share thoughts and ideas on the internet. We are preserving our own knowledge for future generations. Future generations will someday look back at our time with the same fascination that we look back on ancient Egypt. They will try to understand how we lived, what we thought, what we valued. They will read our words and try to comprehend our world. We are connected to the past through the knowledge and wisdom that has been preserved. And we are connected to the future through the knowledge and wisdom that we preserve. The Rosetta Stone is a symbol of these connections. Knowing that language is a bridge across time. Sleep knowing that human knowledge can outlast even the grandest civilizations. Knowing that discovery and understanding are among the greatest joys of human existence. Sleep peacefully, contemplating the wonder of decoding mysteries and understanding the past. Knowing that human brilliance and persistence can solve even the most challenging problems. Knowing that the Rosetta Stone continues to teach us even after 2,000 years. Knowing that we are connected to ancient Egypt through this remarkable stone. Knowing that the ancient Egyptians speak to us across the centuries and we listen.